It was Christmas Eve, and I had driven 45 minutes in the snow to be there. I stood at the front door of the house I had helped buy, holding a foil-covered dish of sweet potato casserole that had taken me 3 hours to make, and a wrapped box containing the noise-canceling headphones my grandson had circled in a catalog back in October. He was 11. I had saved the page. My daughter-in-law, Nicole, answered the door before I could even knock. She must have seen my headlights pull in. "Oh," she said, looking at the casserole. "You made that again?" I smiled. "Daniel's favorite. He's been asking for it since Thanksgiving. Daniel's trying to cut back on sugar." She stepped aside to let me in without offering to take anything from my arms. "We've been eating clean. I told you that in the group chat." I hadn't been added to any group chat. I found that out later. The evening moved the way evenings in that house always moved, carefully, like walking on a floor you weren't sure would hold. My grandchildren, Cooper and Lily, gave me big hugs at the door and then disappeared upstairs with their tablets. Daniel came out of the kitchen, kissed my cheek, told me I looked good, and went back to whatever he'd been doing. Nicole orbited the room, arranging things that didn't need arranging. Dinner was a salad and some kind of grain bowl she'd ordered from a meal kit service. The casserole sat on the counter, untouched, still in its foil. I didn't say anything. Afterward, while Nicole was putting the kids to bed, Daniel and I sat in the living room. I thought maybe this was our moment, the quiet conversation we used to have when he was young, when it was just the two of us after his father passed and the whole world felt too big and too loud and we would sit together and make it smaller. I reached over and put my hand on his arm. "I've missed you," I said. "I feel like I haven't really talked to you in months." He nodded, scrolling his phone. "It's been busy. I know. I want you to know I'm here. For anything, whatever you and Nicole need." He looked up then. Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, something else. Fatigue, maybe, or something closer to irritation. "Mom." He put the phone down. "Can I be honest with you?" "Of course. Nicole and I have talked about this a lot. You're really overwhelming to be around. You show up with food we didn't ask for. You call the kids without checking with us first. You comment on every single photo Nicole posts. She feels like she can't breathe." I sat very still. "I'm not trying to be cruel," he continued, "but we need space. A lot of space." "Honestly?" He looked me in the eye. "The best gift you could give us this Christmas is just to back off. Completely, like disappear for a while. Give us room to be our own family." I heard the words. I understood each one. But sitting there in the living room of the house I had given $135,000 to help them purchase, in front of the unlit fireplace whose chimney I had paid to have relined the previous winter, across from my son, who I had raised alone for 14 years after his father died, I could not make them feel real. "Disappear," I repeated. "I don't mean it like that. I just mean give us room." Nicole appeared in the doorway then, arms crossed, saying nothing. I understood she had been listening. I picked up my purse. I thanked them for dinner. I told them to give my love to the children. I drove 45 minutes back through the snow with the sweet potato casserole on the passenger seat because no one had touched it, and I cried the entire way home, and then I stopped crying and sat in my driveway for a long time with the engine off. I was 67 years old. I had taught 8th grade English for 31 years. I had buried a husband. I had raised a son by myself on a teacher's salary in a town where everything cost a little more than you made, and I had done all of it without asking a single person for help. The next morning, I got out a legal pad and I started writing things down, not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I wrote it all down because I needed to see it in front of me. I needed to look at the shape of the last 8 years. When Daniel and Nicole bought their house in 2016, they were short on the down payment. $40,000 short. I had spent 20 years contributing to a retirement account that I had always pictured as my security, the thing that would let me travel a little, breathe a little, maybe finally see the coast of Maine in the fall. I withdrew $40,000 and gave it to them without being asked twice. When Nicole decided she wanted to open a wellness studio in 2019, she and Daniel came to me with a business plan printed and bound. They needed a co-signer on a small business loan, $60,000. The bank required someone with a stable income and established credit. That was me. I signed. The studio closed 8 months later. When Cooper was born, Nicole decided she wanted to stay home. They needed help covering the shortfall. I began sending $800 a month. That continued for 2.5 years, until Daniel got the regional manager position. The total was just over $23,000. There were smaller things, too. Lily's speech therapy when insurance wouldn't cover it, $3,400. The fence they needed before the HOA fined them, $2,100. The emergency car repair when Nicole's transmission failed, $1,800. Daniel's security deposit on the first apartment he'd ever rented, which I never got back, $1,200. I sat at my kitchen table and I added it all up. 10,500 yuan. Not including the 8 years of Christmas and birthday gifts, the meals I'd brought when Nicole was recovering from her C-section, the gas money I'd spent driving to their house twice a week to watch the grandchildren so Nicole could go to her yoga classes. I thought about Nicole standing in that doorway with her arms crossed while my son told me to disappear. I thought about the sweet potato casserole. Then I put the legal pad in my desk drawer, made myself a cup of coffee, and called my friend Carol. Carol had been my colleague for 22 years before we both retired. She was the kind of woman who said exactly what she thought with no cruelty behind it, which is a rarer quality than people realize. When I told her everything, the dinner, what Daniel had said, the legal pad, the $103,500, she was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret," she said finally, "what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm going to do something." "Good," she said. "It's about time." The first thing I did was call my bank. The business loan I'd co-signed in 2019, the one for Nicole's studio, had been paid off when the studio closed. But there was a second loan I had nearly forgotten about. When Daniel needed to refinance some personal debt in 2021, he'd asked me to co-sign again. A smaller amount, $18,000, at a low interest rate. I had agreed. The payments had been sporadic. The bank had called me twice, and both times I had quietly covered the shortfall without telling Daniel, because I hadn't wanted to cause tension. I asked the loan officer to pull up my full co-signer profile. I listened carefully. Then I asked her what options I had. She explained that because there had been 2 missed payments in the previous 12 months, I had the right to petition for co-signer release, or, alternatively, to flag the account for review, which would require Daniel to refinance the loan entirely without a co-signer. Given his current debt-to-income ratio, she said carefully, that might be difficult to arrange quickly. I asked her to send me all the paperwork. I called my attorney the next day. Her name was Patricia Chen, and I had used her twice before for routine matters. She was brisk and competent and did not waste time. "I want to do 3 things," I told her. "I want to update my will. I want to explore my options as a co-signer on a personal loan where payments have been missed, and I want to understand exactly what my position is regarding a $40,000 gift I made toward a home purchase in 2016, whether any of that creates a legal interest in the property." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me everything." I did. All of it. The dinner, the words, the legal pad, the numbers. When I finished, she said, "You've been very generous for a very long time." "I have," I said. "Let's make sure your generosity is protected going forward." We met at her office on the 27th of December. I brought the legal pad, the loan documents, and a folder of receipts and bank statements I had organized the night before. Patricia reviewed everything with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. She confirmed that regarding the 2021 personal loan, I had grounds to petition for co-signer release, which would force Daniel to assume the loan independently. Given the missed payments, the bank was unlikely to simply approve the transfer Daniel would have to refinance, and his current finances made that complicated. She could initiate the process immediately. Regarding the $40,000 toward the home purchase, she was honest with me. A gift is a gift. Without a promissory note, which we had not drawn up, there was no legal claim on the property, but she could draft a formal letter of record documenting the contribution, which would be useful if the property was ever sold and there were any questions. As for the will, that, she said, was entirely straightforward. I could designate whatever I chose. I told her I wanted to leave the majority of my estate to the literacy nonprofit where I had volunteered every Thursday for the past 4 years, with a separate trust for Cooper and Lily that neither Daniel nor Nicole could access until the children turned 25. Patricia nodded and took notes. There's one more thing, I said, and I explained what I was considering doing next. She looked up from her notepad. How long have you been thinking about this? Since Christmas Eve, I said, but I think I've needed to do it for longer than that. She smiled slightly. I think you're going to be just fine, Margaret. I had a passport. I had renewed it 2 years earlier with vague, hopeful ideas about travel that had never materialized because there was always something: Cooper's birthday, Nicole's studio launch, a family thing I felt I couldn't miss. The passport sat in my desk drawer alongside the legal pad. I took them both out. I had, over the past several years, done careful research into places where a retired American could live well on a modest but stable income. Portugal had come up again and again, specifically Lisbon. The cost of living was manageable. The healthcare was excellent. The city was beautiful in a way that felt old and earned rather than constructed. And there was a substantial community of American expats, people my age, who had made the same calculation and found, on the other side of it, something they hadn't expected. A life that belonged to them again. I called a relocation consultant, whose contact information I had saved 18 months ago in a folder I'd labeled simply Someday. Someday, I decided, was January. I booked a flight for the 14th. A one-way ticket to Lisbon, with an open-ended apartment rental already arranged through the consultant, a furnished flat in the Alfama district, a neighborhood of steep cobblestone streets and faded tile facades, and the sound of fado music drifting from somewhere you could never quite locate. It cost $1,100 a month, which was less than I was currently paying in utilities and incidentals on a house that was too large for one person. I told Carol the day before I left. We sat in my kitchen, and I showed her the flight confirmation and the apartment photos, and she looked at everything carefully, and then she looked at me. You're really doing it, she said. I'm really doing it. What do you need from me? I told her. Carol would check my mail, forward anything important, and water the 2 plants I hadn't been able to bring myself to get rid of. If Daniel called her, she was not to tell him where I was. She was not to say I was missing. She was to say only that I had taken a trip and would be in touch when I was ready. That's very restrained, she said. I expected something more dramatic. The paperwork is the dramatic part, I said. I already handled that. She squeezed my hands across the kitchen table. You should have done this years ago. I know, I said. I landed in Lisbon on a Tuesday morning, and the light was extraordinary. That is the thing no one tells you about Lisbon, the quality of the light. It comes off the river and the white-tiled buildings in a way that makes everything look slightly illuminated from within, like the city is generating its own warmth. I stood on the sidewalk outside the airport with my 2 rolling suitcases, and I breathed air that tasted like salt and eucalyptus, and I thought, for the first time in years, that I might be all right. The apartment was exactly as advertised. Small. Yes, about half the size of my house, but the windows were tall and let in the afternoon light, and there was a terrace no bigger than a dining table where I could sit and see a thin triangle of the Tagus River between the rooftops. The bed had a good mattress. The kitchen had a gas stove. There was a bakery on the corner that opened at 7 in the morning and sold pastéis de nata that cost 30 cents each. I bought 4 of them on my first morning and ate them slowly at a little table outside, watching the neighborhood wake up. And I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten it had a name. Peace. My phone began ringing on the 4th day. Daniel first. 3 calls on a Thursday morning, back to back. Then a voicemail. Mom, hey. Call me back when you get a chance. We got a letter from a bank about the loan, and I just want to understand what's going on. Then, 2 days later. Mom, seriously, call me back. The bank is saying there's some kind of review on the cosigner status. I don't understand what that means, but we need to talk about it. Then Nicole, which surprised me. She had never called me directly. Her voice on the voicemail was a different register than the one she used in person, tighter, more careful. Margaret, I'm not sure what's happening, but we received some documents from an attorney that are a little confusing, and if you could just call Daniel back, we would really appreciate it. I stood on my small terrace looking at the river triangle and listened to every message twice. Then I called Daniel back. He answered on the first ring. Mom, where are you? We've been trying to reach you. I know, I said. I'm sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. I've been settling in. Settling in where? What does that mean? It means I took your advice, Daniel. I gave you room. There was a pause. What? You told me, on Christmas Eve, that the best gift I could give you was to disappear. Back off completely. Give your family room to breathe. I kept my voice very calm. I've been thinking about that, and you were right. I needed to step back and give myself some room too. So I did. Mom, I didn't mean for you to literally leave. Where are you? Somewhere beautiful, I said. I'm fine. I'm happy. I want to talk about the loan. Yes. Okay. The bank sent a letter saying you're petitioning for cosigner release? What does that mean for us? I explained it as clearly and kindly as I could. It meant he would need to refinance the remaining $14,000 independently. It meant the bank would assess his current financial profile. It meant that going forward, his financial obligations were his own. But why? He said. We've been making the payments. 2 were missed last year, I said. I covered them both without saying anything. I realized I shouldn't have done that. I was making it easy for you not to notice. A long silence. I didn't know you did that, he said quietly. I know. That's my fault. I should have told you, Mom. His voice had changed. Something in it had softened and gone uncertain, the way it used to when he was young and had done something he already knew was wrong. About what I said at Christmas. I know you didn't mean it as literally as I took it, I said. But Daniel, when you tell someone to disappear even as a figure of speech, you should mean it a little. Because sometimes they will. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, are you okay? I am genuinely okay, I said. I am more okay than I've been in years. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap and felt the warmth of the winter sun, which in Lisbon in January is still real and present in a way that American January sun is not. A cat that had adopted my terrace wandered over and settled against my ankle. I scratched behind its ears and thought about all the Christmas Eves I had driven through snow to sit in rooms where I was tolerated rather than welcomed, and I felt no grief about any of it. Only a vast and sunlit clarity. The second call I hadn't expected came from a number I didn't recognize, 2 weeks after I arrived. It was a woman. She introduced herself as the director of the literacy program where I had volunteered, the one I'd named in my updated will. She said she'd received a letter from my attorney confirming a planned bequest, and she was calling simply to thank me, and also to say that she had heard through a mutual friend that I had moved to Lisbon. I just wanted to say, she told me, that we have a small partner program here, English tutoring for immigrant families. If you ever wanted to volunteer remotely, or even in person, if you come back to visit, we would be so grateful. I told her I would think about it. I thought about it for approximately 4 hours, and then I emailed her and said yes. The weeks settled into a shape I hadn't had since before Daniel was born, before I was anyone's mother or anyone's anything. I walked every morning. I enrolled in a beginner Portuguese class that met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I joined a book club for English-speaking expats that gathered on the first Sunday of the month at a wine bar near the waterfront, where I met a woman named Diane who had left Houston 2 years earlier after her husband died and had never looked back, and a man named Robert who had retired from architecture and spent his mornings sketching the city's azulejo tile facades and his afternoons being genuinely content, which he described as the hardest skill he'd ever acquired. I began sleeping through the night. My phone still rang, but less. Daniel, once a week. Nicole, twice, both times brief and careful, as if she was reading from a script she wasn't sure she'd memorized. I answered when I felt like answering and let it go to voicemail when I didn't, and I stopped feeling guilty about either. The real letter came on a Wednesday morning in March. Not a phone call. A letter, handwritten, in an envelope with 2 stamps, forwarded to me through Carol with a sticky note that said, "Margaret, read this one." I trusted Carol's judgment completely, so I sat down at my kitchen table with my coffee and opened it. It was from Nicole, not the Nicole from the doorway, not the Nicole who stood with her arms crossed while her husband told me to disappear. This was something different. 4 pages, small handwriting, the lines slightly uneven in the way of someone who has written and rewritten and finally just let it go. She wrote that she owed me an apology. Not the conditional kind, not "I'm sorry if you felt hurt," but a real one. She wrote that she had spent years resenting me for things that she now understood were her own fears. She had been afraid that Daniel still needed me in a way that made her feel secondary. She had been afraid that her children loved me more than they did things she taught them. She had been afraid that my presence made visible, by contrast, everything she felt she lacked. And instead of naming any of that, she had managed it by pushing me away, by making my presence unwelcome, by making Daniel feel that loving me was somehow a disloyalty to her. She wrote, "I told Daniel what to say on Christmas Eve. I'm not proud of that. He doesn't know I'm telling you this now. But you deserve to know that it was my words he used. And they were wrong. You have never been anything but generous to us, and we repaid that generosity by making you feel like a burden. You weren't the one who needed to disappear. I was the one who needed to grow up." I read the letter 4 times. Then I set it on the table and looked out the window at the light on the buildings across the narrow street for a long time. I thought about Daniel, about the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard, and he'd put them in a cup of water on the windowsill above the sink. About the 15-year-old who sat with me at the kitchen table for 3 nights running after his father's funeral, not talking, just present, because we both understood that presence was sometimes the whole thing. He had not become a bad man. He had become a man who was afraid of his wife and didn't know what to do about it. And in that fear, he had said a thing he should not have said, using words that were not even his own. I wrote Nicole back. It took me several drafts. I told her I appreciated the letter. I told her it took courage, and I meant that. I told her I was not ready to come back, and that my decision to leave had not been entirely about Christmas Eve. It had been about a long accumulation of small moments that I had let pass without naming, and that responsibility was partly mine. I told her I hoped she and Daniel could work through the things she'd described, because they were worth working through. I told her the children were lucky to have a mother who was capable of writing a letter like this one. I told her I was not coming home, but I was not gone either. Patricia called me in April with news about the loan. Daniel had successfully refinanced. The process had been harder than expected. He'd had to consolidate some other debt and accept a higher interest rate, but it was done. My name was off the account, entirely. He called our office twice during the process, Patricia told me. He was not angry. He seemed more chastened is the word I'd use. That sounds right, I said. There's something else. She paused. The house. You know I told you that a gift without a promissory note doesn't create a legal claim. I remember. Daniel called last week, voluntarily. He said he wants to formalize a repayment arrangement for the $40,000. He's proposing monthly installments. He asked me to draw up an agreement. I was quiet for a moment. He doesn't have to do that, I said. He knows. That's why he's doing it. I sat with that for a while. Tell him yes, I said, and tell him thank you. In May, Carol forwarded me a drawing. 2 drawings, actually, folded inside an envelope. Cooper had drawn a woman standing on what appeared to be a cliff above the ocean, with a sun that had 12 rays and a smile. Under it, he'd written, in his 11-year-old printing, "This is you, Grandma. Dad showed us where Portugal is. It's far." Lily had drawn the cat. She'd heard me mention it once on a call, sitting on a tiny terrace. Under hers, she'd written, "I hope the cat is nice. We miss you. Lily plus Coop." I taped them to the kitchen wall above the stove. I taught my first remote tutoring session for the literacy program that month. A woman named Amara, who had been in the United States for 3 years and was working toward her GED. We met over video on Tuesday mornings, her in a kitchen in Philadelphia, me on my Lisbon terrace with the cat on my lap. She was brilliant and determined, and she made me feel useful in a way that was clean, without complication or obligation attached to it. It turns out that is what teaching always felt like. When I was young and first started, I had simply forgotten. On a Sunday evening in June, I was sitting with Diane and Robert at our usual table at the wine bar, when Robert raised his glass and said, "To the people who left before they disappeared." We all drank to that. Walking home along the waterfront afterward, the Tagus dark and wide beside me, and the lights of the opposite bank reflected in the water, I thought about the word Daniel had used that Christmas Eve, disappear. He'd said it like it was a simple thing, a small ask, a reasonable one. Back off, give us room, disappear for a while. I had done it. I had disappeared completely. I had taken his word and held it up to the light and turned it, and what I found underneath it was not the punishment he'd implied, and not the erasure he'd perhaps imagined, but something else entirely. A life. A whole life that had been waiting under all the other lives I'd been living. I didn't disappear. I arrived. There are things I gave up that I still miss some mornings. The sound of Cooper and Lily running down a hallway. Daniel's voice in a room I'm also standing in. Not over a phone. The particular quality of light in my own kitchen, which I know in a way I will never know the light here, no matter how long I stay. But there are things I have now that I had forgotten were possible. Mornings that belong to no one but me. A city that asks nothing. A terrace and a cat and a triangle of river. A woman in Philadelphia who is learning to read her way toward a better life, and who sends me a thumbs-up emoji every time she finishes a new chapter. Money that stays in my account because no one has a quiet emergency. Sleep. I turned 68 last month. I did not spend it in a car driving through snow. I spent it at a long table in a courtyard restaurant with Diane and Robert and 4 other people who have become, without my planning it, my people, the ones who call to check in, who notice when I seem tired, who pass the bread without being asked. Diane gave a little toast. She said, "To Margaret, who disappeared and then decided to stay." I laughed. It was exactly right. My son called that evening to sing me happy birthday. Badly, off-key, the way he used to when he was small and thought the goal was volume rather than pitch. I could hear Cooper and Lily in the background, adding their voices to the chaos. I sat on the terrace with the phone pressed to my ear and let them sing. The cat climbed onto my lap. The river was dark and quiet below the city, doing what rivers do, moving always in one direction, not backward, never back.